And let's see. Today, I need to cover chapter 10 with you. Okay, chapter 10 is delivering your speech. So everything in this section of the textbook is really about the delivery. You know, it's what do you do when you stand in front of people and you have to sort of say, present what it is, everything that you thought about, the outline that you worked on, the examples, all these things, that's all good. You got that worked out, but there's so much that goes into the actual moment of delivery, okay? And remember what I told you, that one of the most powerful things about speeches, and specifically oral communication, is the fact that you are having an interaction with your audience. You're having a relationship. You're having a transaction, okay? And that's the most powerful part. And so, yes, I know we're kind of limited here being in a digital world like that, but that if we can simulate that to whatever level we can, we should try to, because that is the most powerful part of a speech. So, so this chapter is all about delivery. You know, what happens, what goes into, what's involved in a process of actual delivery, because just as mindful as you are about your outline, just as mindful as you are about your transitions, okay, about your signposts, and all these different, you know, things, you have to be at the same time mindful of, you know, your presentation. Your actual skill of presenting it and delivering it, because there's a lot that goes into that. So, and depending on your environment, depending on what your setting is, you might have to adjust a few things. Okay. So let's begin here in chapter 10 with the opening remark here. The authors explain that your choices of how and what you're going to say, the mode of delivery, is based on a number of criteria. The occasion, purpose of your speech, your audience expectation, and then your strengths and weaknesses as a speaker. If you know that you're good at something and you're not good at something, you know, always play to your strengths. Don't do something you're not comfortable with. And so if you know you're good speaking impromptu, then use that. You know, if that's your strength. It creates an incredible connection with your audience. Impromptu speeches tend to be much more emotionally engaging than speeches that are other, you know, pre-written speeches, pre-planned speeches. So impromptu is good as long as you keep on point. And a good short impromptu speech is not that hard to do. So what types of speeches are there? You know, obviously there are different occasions depending on what you have. So your occasion is speaking in class, okay? And the purpose of your speech is to inform. That's what you're going to be doing. Your first speech is to inform. And so that's what you're doing. And then, of course, your audience is your classmates. That's what you imagine, people who share a classroom with you but don't really know you close and well. So you have to tell them about yourself. And so let's go through the types of speech that are described in this textbook. The first types of speech is the most common one is called extraporaneous speech. So extraporaneous speech is the kind of speech that you have planned for, prepared for. You have written out your outline, you've thought of all your examples, you created some note cards, you practiced it, you had a chance to rehearse your examples, whatever is that you're incorporating into your speech. You had a chance to kind of run through it a few times and you feel confident about it, and you can probably do it because you got your note cards. If you forget something, it's all right there. All you really need is your outline and the main points that you're making. Now, that's extraporaneous speech. Now, that's most common type of speech that people usually give. I mean, few people give speeches without being prepared. Most people do prepare for a speech, but an impromptu speech, the next type, is actually very powerful, very effective. It's this impromptu speech is the speech that you give on a spur of the moment. You did not prepare for it. You did not plan for it. You didn't think about all these factors that we talked about, like writing out your outline, thinking of your examples and illustrations, thinking about your audience, picking the best words. You didn't really have, you doing it on the fly. You're just in the moment. And where in your extemporaneous speech, you had a chance to research things. You had a chance to go and look at things and figure it out and kind of work it through. An impromptu speech is you're building it 100% from what you know, from your previous knowledge. So it's not like you can, research anything or do anything to prepare for your speech. You're just either you know it or you don't, and you're speaking from the knowledge base you have, which changes it quite a bit. So you better be prepared to speak on the topic because you have to know what you're talking about. Got to get your facts right and things like that. And so, but also this type of speech is the most dynamic because it's the most emotional. It's usually very time sensitive. It happens in the right moment, in the right time, at the right place. You have the opportunity and you take that opportunity, and that's your impromptu speech. Now, a lot of people actually make impromptu speeches every single day. They speak to other people all the time. It's not something, new. We all do. And most of the time when we speak to people, we don't prepare. We just make it happen. So it's not something so out of, this world. It's actually something common that we do all the time. We just don't think about it. We get together with friends and all of a sudden we make a short little speech. We don't think of it as a speech. We just think of it as a conversation. But a lot of times, if we have a bit of a monologue on some topic where we're expressing our opinion, it is almost like a mini speech that we give. Okay, so this is a great little box right here on page 157. It talks about skills, okay, and impromptu speaking. And so this is really cool. The device that they give is this: pay close attention to the discussion of the question being asked. So if you're having a discussion, make sure you're on point. Don't ramble on about something that people are actually not talking about. Because what happens is our mind takes us places, and it's tricky. You can kind of derail yourself. Jot down a few notes. So if you're having a dialogue with a person, if it's a series of miniature speeches and you make a point, they make a point, make a notes about their point so you can repeat it basically. And channel your emotional energy into enthusiasm. That's good. That's a good point. So what I want you to see here is the most important part, okay? And this applies to all your speeches, but this is a perfect kind of short speech, okay? Right there in the box, there's 4 points. So first step is the point step. Tell your listeners what your main point is. So say your main point. Then the reason step is state a reason for your main point and why is it worth considering or listening or entertaining. So why is it important? All right, that's your reason step. Then you provide the support. You support examples, illustrations, comparisons, quotations, statistics, anything that you can think of to support your reason and your point, essentially. And then your restatement step is when you summarize by restating your main point once again, so that there's a clarity of what it is that you wanted to say by all those words that you have put together, essentially. So that's a really, really short, very simple structure of a speech. And if you think about it, what I did for you guys just a few minutes ago is really no different from that exact thing. It's very short, sweet. Boom, boom, boom. I took you through these steps. And so 5 minutes is all you need to kind of make a very simple point. So that's impromptu speech. And impromptu speeches have their own little dynamic. Now, there is a type of a speech that's called a manuscript speech, okay? And that one is when you write it out ahead of time and use a teleprompter. Most people do not get to do manuscript speeches. I'm actually working right now on a series of promos that I'm supposed to do. And I am manuscripting everything I'm saying because I'm being recorded and it's a green screen and I have to use a teleprompter. And so I actually have to read my words exactly as they are. And I have to think about my gestures. And so a lot of that kind of planning goes into it. So I am not memorizing my speech. I don't want to memorize my speech. I actually have too much to memorize. But doing a series of fast-paced promos, with a teleprompter you got to be really careful and say exactly what you're supposed to say. And it never works perfectly because, of course, there's always going to be several takes and something's going to go wrong. But the idea is that manuscript speech is a type of speech that occasionally you might have to give, but you have to be able to read that speech from the manuscript. Now, it is not advisable to read your speech from a piece of paper because that's no longer a speech, that's you reading. Actually, it's very boring, and most people do not enjoy those speeches anyway. So manuscript speeches are appropriate, but only for certain limited amount of occasions. Memorized speech is a speech that you might want to give somewhere. It's a very short speech. It almost kind of like an inspirational moment or something, and so you want to memorize it because the words have to be exact in order for it to be effective. Memorizing speech will make it more formal, but you can, there are ways to do it, to tone it down essentially. But very few occasions that I can think of to use a memorized speech, but there are some. So these are the most common varieties of speech. So you don't get to do a manuscript speech. You don't get to do a memorized speech. Your speech is going to be extraporaneous speech. You're obviously preparing for it, and so you have an opportunity to get the PowerPoint and everything together. Now, as you are attempting to communicate, there are things that you can do to channel your, sort of say, speech in the right direction. One of the big things that we've already talked about is being conversational. Conversational speech is considered to be the most desired type of speech. We call it conversational because in this speech, even though you are the only person speaking, it is a monologue. You're speaking in a manner and in a way as if you are allowing your audience to speak with you, even though they're not saying anything. They're listening, they're passive, but they are engaging your speech because what you're doing is you're simulating conversation, and you're making it in a conversational style. You're making it in an accessible oral style presentation where it is way less formal than if you were just read from a book. It is more simple words, words from the heart, words from your mind, the best words that come to you at that moment. It doesn't have to be perfect because it's not about perfection. It's about connection, the emotional connection that you make with your audience. So, and as you do that, obviously, as you practice, that's what you want to focus on. You want to focus on sounding like you are having a conversation with your audience, so that people are comfortable listening to you. Now, when it comes to your voice is your biggest tool in your speech. And there are several things that you can do with your voice to make things better or worse. So one of the features that the textbook picks out on is intelligibility. Intelligibility is whether a listener can understand you or not. If you speak unintelligibly, if you do not enunciate, if you do not pronounce words correctly, your audience will not be able to understand you as well as if they would if you pronounce things correctly. And this is why it's really important that when people learn how to speak, they learn how to enunciate. They learn how to pronounce words correctly. The worst things that possible, that when somebody's delivering a speech, they keep using a word and they keep mispronouncing it. And that makes it terrible for me because I can't sit still over there. I keep wanting to tell them that is not how it's pronounced, but it drives me crazy. Occasionally I hear people do that. So to be intelligible is very, very important. People have to be able to catch what you're saying and catch it with precision. And only then they can interpret the content, because you can actually lose the content by being not clear enough, by slurring words, by having bad pronunciation. Regional accents can do that. All sorts of things can damage your intelligibility. So one of the factors of intelligibility, which is why people actually do not become easily perceived is volume. Some people basically talk too softly. When they give a presentation, when they give a speech, they do not talk loud enough. Why? Because they're shy, they're afraid, they're reserved, whatever. They're unsure of themselves. They get nervous. Usually when people get nervous, they don't get louder, they get quieter. And so also, as you stand in a room, if it's a live audience and it's a small room, or a big room, you have to basically adjust your volume to the size of the room that you're in, and you have to be able to project. A lot of people speak, and somebody sitting up front, they can hear them. Somebody sitting in the back, they cannot hear them. So that is the first tell sign of a bad speaker, is when they do not project their voice in order for the back row to hear them. Sometimes you have amplification, sometimes you don't have amplification. If you're speaking in a setting that doesn't have, audio equipment, to share with you, you simply have to raise your voice enough to be heard. You can't sound as if you're screaming, but you should be speaking loud enough for people to hear you. They may have to strain a little bit to hear you, but they should be able to hear you clearly. Now, one of the features of your voice when you deliver a speech is called rate. And rate is basically the number of words that you speak per minute. Different people have different rate. Some of it depends on their culture, where they come from. Some of it depends on their locality, where they're from and how they tend to speak. So people from more southern climates tend to speak in a much slower and more relaxed ways. People from a northern climates tend to speak faster. And that just, it changes from culture to culture, but a lot of times the rate you have to be mindful of. Some people are fast speakers and other people are slow speakers. Well, you actually do not want to be either. You want to be in the middle. You want to be somewhere in between. You don't want to be a fast speaker, because then there's going to be a bunch of people who are slow speakers. They're going to feel uncomfortable. They're not going to catch up to you. You're going to leave them in the dust, and they're not being engaged by your speech because it's too fast. And the other way is to slow speakers. People who are fast speakers are impatient. If you speak too slow, they will, their attention will go away, and they will be expressing thoughts to themselves of how annoyed they are, how you can get to your point. You need to hurry up. So that really depends on people's culture. It depends on their personality a lot. But if you can control the rate of how many words come out per minute, you kind of want to be in the mid-range, basically. So that's, so we talked about the volume, we talked about the rate, enunciation. Enunciation is when you clearly pronounce all the words. Sometimes we slur words. Sometimes we swallow letters, entire syllables, sometimes even a half a word. It's kind of a lazy way of doing that. And we're all guilty of that. And the more informal we are, the more we're guilty of sort of this lazy performance. And essentially that can hurt you if you do not enunciate clearly. And then there are standards of pronunciation. There are proper ways to pronounce things, and there are improper ways to pronounce things. So you definitely want to focus on pronouncing things properly, at least properly for the people who are listening to you, because they have certain level of expectation, and what they think is proper is what you should do versus whatever you think is proper, because it doesn't really matter what you think. The speech is for them. So you want to focus on your pronunciation to basically use your voice in a masterful way as a tool. Okay. Let's see. So that's kind of an idea.
That's something that's that's something, the pronunciation is something that I'm doing wrong sometimes, because for me are some words or some issues that I need to improve.
Yes.
But it's good to know that if you if you like record yourself and
Mhm.
you can hear yourself and you will improve your pronunciation in that way.
Yes, I will tell you. So, Francisco, most people, when I speak to them, they do not realize that English is not my native language. People who have very good musical ear, they can usually tell. They can tell my accent. Some people never catch it. They just think that English is my native language, and it's not. I learned it just like you learned it, the same way. And I had a chance to practice it a lot, work on it, and learn how to pronounce words in very precise way. And so this is a weakness that you have, and you recognize that you have it, which is very good. And that's something you work on. I will tell you that there is a way to sort of say conquer that, overcome that. You know that this is kind of what's holding you back sometimes, because a lot of times you probably are speaking and people are not catching everything you're saying. They're catching some of what you're saying, but not everything. And as a result, they are stuck. You're not being successful in getting across what it is that you want to say because they only understood half of it or 70% of it. And whatever gets lost is, taken away from your message, essentially. And that's frustrating. And so I actually worked with a friend in college when I was in college, and I studied to be a linguist, by the way, so I know about these things. But I worked with a friend of mine who was from India. People from India have very distinct accent, very distinct, and for Americans, it's very hard to understand. Indians speak English. I mean, they're one of their national language that actually all Indians speak is English. Not every Indian speaks English, but a lot of Indians who are educated do speak English. They grew up speaking English, so because that's their national language, besides all the native languages that they have. But that's one language that binds them together as a people. But their version of English is very different. And so when people come to America, they've been speaking English all their life, but the way they speak it is so different that Americans have a hard time understanding them. And that has to do with regional pronunciation. How it's acceptable to pronounce those words in India is not acceptable in America. They do not work. So while Indians use certain substitutes that are more comfortable to them for certain sounds in their language, that same practice does not work in America. It actually creates confusion. So if you've heard Indian regional accent, an Indian trying to speak English, then you know what I mean. So it's a very distinct type of an accent, and it'd be hard to overcome. Some people struggle with it for a long, long time. So a friend of mine struggled with this in class. He would, raise his hands and try to speak, and the professors would not understand what in the world he's saying because his accent was so heavy. Even though he was really saying good things, people could not understand him. So I actually spent a long time working with him on pronunciation, where basically he would pronounce words and it would be like, Francisco would be like, repeat after me. And he would have to mimic, literally mimic. And after he started working on certain sounds and we got rid of the certain sounds that were basically making his speech hard to understand, all of a sudden people start understanding him better. And he comes to me and he says, look, I notice how much people talk to me now. They understand me so much more. And so that basically creates an opportunity for me to have communication with them, because before, because they couldn't understand me, they wouldn't talk to me. They just kind of avoided me. Now I am able to engage with people on such a level. So he saw a huge change. I mean, we worked for basically about 4 weeks, pretty hard on his accent. And he was able to improve it. Not 100%, but he probably polished off about 20% of his accent in a way that it was like the worst sort of sounds that he kept, messing up on. And so after doing that, he saw an improvement right away. And so there are people who work with that. Mimicking is one of the best ways to improve your pronunciation, to improve your accent, because we all have regional accents. There's certain sounds that are more comfortable to us because of where we come from, because of the language that we're used to, versus English, which is second language. So essentially, or third or fourth, depending on where you are. But that's the idea. So regional accents sometimes could be hard to overcome, but they can be overcome. So I'll just encourage you in that. That can be done. As long as you know that that's your weakness, work on mimicking. I will tell you what I did. I sat for hours watching newscaster channels, like just watching a news program. And I would pick a new, and by the way, most news anchors, unless you're watching like a local channel, if you watch like a national TV channel, most of them do not have regional accents. Most of them speak kind of like in the middle. They do not speak like they're from the north of the United States. They do not speak like they're from the south. They speak like they're from the middle. So I would mimic them. I would sit there and I literally would repeat everything they say with the same exact inflection of the voice that they say. And one of the biggest achievements that you can do is to catch the pronunciation and then the inflection of the voice, because that's what makes you sound like a local, is to catch the inflection. There's certain words that are pronounced in a certain way, certain stresses, how you do it makes you sound native. And that's what it is. So that's what I did for hours, just watching TV and repeating like a parrot everything they're saying. But the point was to practice and to get myself comfortable and to create a pattern for myself to imitate. And then I would be able to essentially do it without them, finding my own words, but imitating that which I have seen. So it's a technique, but it's an effective one. So which brings me to the whole idea of pronunciation and dialects. Dialect is a way that we use grammar and vocabulary that is unique to a particular group or a particular region of people. So people have dialects. People from India have a very specific Indian dialect. They speak English, but within their own dialect, and they use their own unique sounds that are typical of their native languages that they mix into English, and it doesn't work for English speakers from other countries. It's just hard for them to understand. Speakers who are Asian also have a hard time with English sounds. They take sounds from their culture and try to incorporate them into English. And it just makes English sound terrible to a person who is, from a different region, because they cannot follow it. It's too many substitutions of sounds. If you can't say a certain combination of letters, you should practice on saying it over and over until you can, rather than just give up and find a substitution. So, and that's what a lot of people do. They find a sound that they do know how to say easily, and they just and it's close enough, and they substitute it with that sound, thinking that it will work. It creates a lot of confusion for people who are in the majority, who are used to a very different form of English. Let's put it that way. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, in your speech, when you're speaking, one of the ways to make things interesting is to vary your rate. We already talked about the rate is the speech speed, essentially, with which you speak your words out. But you can variate it. You can get faster, you can get slower. You can use pauses, and then you can go through a whole bunch of little phrases that you need to get through really fast because you need to make your point and get along with it. You see what I just did? You can pause to create, certain feeling. And then you can raise your pitch, go higher, or you can lower your pitch and go lower. So depending on what you want, the emotion that you want to convey, maybe a higher pitch voice creates a bigger strain, creates a more attention, and then lower pitch voice tones it down, makes it more calm, makes it more reserved. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you can speak faster, slower, higher, lower, and you can stress certain words in certain ways to make a point. In fact, the way you use stresses in English sentences is very important. It works like that in other languages as well, but English language relies on word order to communicate meaning, whether other languages are a bit more inflected, where the endings and the grammar kind of guide you more. So English doesn't have that. English is not very inflected language. So you actually have to use these techniques in English more than you would maybe in some other languages, okay? And so the idea of stressing something or emphasizing something can actually turn the meaning of the entire phrase of what you're saying. So look with me on page 161. There's some really great examples over here. I love these. So we have a simple sentence. The sentence is Jane taking Tom out for pizza tonight. That's the entire sentence, okay? So depending on what word I am going to stress in my speech, the meaning of that sentence will change. Not the content. The content's going to stay the same. It's the same sentence. But how I mean it, what I am trying to say by it will change, okay? So here's first. Jane's taking Tom out for pizza tonight. Do you notice what I just did? I emphasized name Jane. So the point of my sentence, that is Jane and not somebody else, okay? The emphasis on Jane because I want you to know who. That's the entire point. What they're going out to eat doesn't matter. It's who is doing it. That's important. Jane, now if I'm taking, I can take a different approach and I could say Jane is taking Tom out for pizza tonight. You see what I just did? I stressed the word Tom. And in this case, it's not who is taking Tom out tonight, but she's taking Tom, not some other guy, but Tom. So now it's all about this guy that is going to go have pizza with Jane, right? You could see how we just shifted of what I wanted you to hear in the sentence from who is doing it to who is being taken out for pizza. I take the third sentence as Jane taking Tom out for pizza tonight. Now, I stress the word out by simply emphasizing it, right, in my speech. And by doing that, I am stressing now that they're going out. They're not staying at the home and having another pizza. They're not ordering in and getting delivery, that they're going out. She's taking them out for pizza tonight. So that's the idea, is that they're not going to stay at home, that they're going to go out. So it's not important who. Now it's the fact that they're going out. That's the key. The sentence hasn't changed. I'm still using the same exact words, but the meaning of my sentence, what I want you to hear from my words, changes completely. Here's another one. Jane's taking Tom out for pizza tonight. Now, all of a sudden, the word pizza is emphasized. And it's not that she's, taking him out for hamburgers or tacos or anything like that. It's all about the pizza now. She's taking him out for pizza tonight. I'm emphasizing what food they're going to eat. So what's important in that sentence is what I'm emphasizing. And I am pointing to the importance of that word through stress, through emphasis. So last example, Jane's taking Tom out for pizza tonight. See what just happened? I stressed the word tonight. And by doing that, I am now expressing that it's important that this is tonight. This is right now. This is, today, not tomorrow, not some other day, not next week, but tonight. Tonight is the night. It's the urgency of that moment, that I'm trying to stress. Same exact sentence. The words did not change, but every time I emphasize the different word in that sentence, the meaning of what I wanted you to hear changed, and it changed through emphasis. So this is the idea. When you do improper stress patterns, when you do improper emphasis in your sentences, that's when you confuse your audience. But your audience will hear the words that you emphasize more clearly. And when they do, they will know that this is the signal of that's what you really find key and important in the sentence. That's what it's about. The reason why you're saying what you're saying is that word versus another word. So the meaning is found in that word. And that's important. So you could see it's a very simple illustration, but it's a really effective one. I love this illustration. I think it's just brilliant. So how the book explains it with a simple sentence being twisted in so many different ways. So whether you use a pause or you use a, emphasis, it really depends on you. But the idea of varying your voice to draw attention to what it is that you truly want people to hear in your speech is something that goes into the process of speech delivery, which a lot of people don't think about. That is one of the skills that a lot of times are kind of natural skills, but essentially, if you are purposeful about it, if you're intentional about it, then you will use it the right way. And there are wrong ways of using it, of course. All right, so the other way we communicate is non-verbally a lot of times. And non-verbal communication is actually quite powerful. So there are several things that the authors talk about in non-verbal communication section on page 162 and 163. That's important, guys, for you to note. Non-linguistic communication, okay, is what we're talking about. And they write, speakers disclose their emotional states through their non-verbal behaviors. So people watch your facial expressions. As you express yourself, they will feel it along with you, and they will pick up on your attitude and on your mood and on the things that are going through your mind, because it will be on your face. That's the idea. And when you do use your nonverbal communication, meaning you change the way your face looks, or you gesticulate with your hands, or do something, when you use nonverbal ways of behaving, you are basically enriching your message. You're adding to your message. You are using that stress point or directing attention, reinforcing something in your speech. And that just makes your speech more dynamic. So using nonverbal ways of communicating while you're delivering your speech is preferable and actually desirable. But there's a right way and a wrong way of doing it. One of the things that the authors note in this book, and this is really key to understand, is the nonverbal messages, they create a reciprocal interaction between speakers and listeners. This is why watching a live speech, being there in the room, is completely different than watching it on TV. Being there, watching the person, seeing their face, feeling the atmosphere in that room, in that spot, in that place, in that moment, creates a bond between a speaker and an audience, a connection, an interaction, a transaction, call it whatever it is. There's an exchange that goes back and forth. And a lot of times that exchange is encapsulated in that which is not said. And that's the nonverbal behavior, okay? That's what you are, experiencing. So I'll share a funny example with you. There was a wedding that I once went to, and it was an outdoor wedding, and they were doing it in this big, big, huge farmhouse. It's beautiful, huge oak trees and everything like that. And unfortunately, too many people, and the septic tank overflowed. And the flat area where the wedding was going on was getting flooded with human waste. And it was terrible, in a sense that everybody kind of went through the service very fast, and they were kind of almost cringing, because the smell was so bad. And in many ways, the reception was a lot better than the wedding, because people were stuck in the particular spot where they did not want to be. And it wasn't smelling so well, and the nonverbal behavior of the people communicated how unpleasant they felt at the moment. Some people were able to tone it down, of course, because they were professionals and things like that, and they knew what to do. But other people were not so good, especially little kids, and that created a certain mood and a tone to a wedding that was very, very unfortunate. But anyway, something I've experienced, and I thought that was pretty bad. So, and so these people pick up on these nonverbal things all the time, and it creates a mood, it creates an atmosphere, and it is a back and forth interaction. When you're there, when you're participating in this, it's it's pretty powerful. It's pretty telling. Now, another aspect of nonverbal communication, besides your face, besides gestures, is the proxemics. Proxemics has to do with the space, the proximity. That's that word. Proximity means how close you are, how far away from something. It's the distance. It's the degree of separation between you and your audience. Do you want to be close to your audience, or do you want to be far away from your audience? Well, that depends on how formal or informal your speech is. So it depends who you're speaking in front of. It depends on your audience. It depends on your relationship with them, the comfort level that they have with you. So you might want to if you want to be less formal, you want to be closer to them. You want to be down to their level. So I oftentimes hate speaking from some high up podium somewhere up there, up high, far away from the people, because I tend to be much more transactional in my speech. I like to be close to the people. So I would actually, if the podium is portable, I would ask them to put it down closer to the people, move it closer and move it down. I don't want to be up looking down. I want to be on the same eye level with my audience. I've been known to sit down in order to speak so that I can be on the same level with people, so that the conversation can be more informal, basically. That's the idea. So, and so if you want a more informal atmosphere, that's one of the ways of doing it, reducing the distance between you and your audience. And that all of that depends on how formal the moment is and what is the nature of your, interaction with people and your personal preference. Some people do not like being close to the audience. They like to stay away. So that just depends on you and the dynamics of the situation. Let's see, movement and stance. Posture means a lot. How you move around, how you stand in front of people. If you slouch, if you move a lot back and forth, you could show nervousness, anxiety. If you stand still and do not move at all, it also shows, it communicates about how you feel. So essentially, your movements do communicate how you feel and what you feel about things. And that's something that you have to be mindful of when you are doing speaking in front of a live audience. It's that nonverbal communication now, not necessarily with your face, not necessarily with your hands, but with your entire body. Being close, being far, moving too much, moving too little, moving too freely, pacing back and forth across the stage, all of that makes a big difference. So you want to be comfortable. You want to be able to change your posture from time to time. You don't want to be too stiff, standing still, like as if you're, a statue or something like that. But you want to be able to reinforce, sort of say what you're saying with your body. And that means moving strategically, not just moving for the sake of moving. Although I do recommend not standing still if you're giving a speech, but doing a little bit of a movement back and forth. It's actually good and healthy for you. Okay, so a little recap here. On page 164, 165, the authors talk about, let's see, they talk about facial expressions. What do your facial expressions actually mean? Okay, and so they explain that your facial expressions function in a number of ways, or at least whatever you think they mean, and then how people understand them may be different. But here's one of the functions. They express your feelings. How you feel, what you feel, people will be able to see through your face if you're close enough. Again, if you're far away, they can't tell. And so they display emotion, your disposition. And when people are listening to your speech, they're watching you as well. They're watching your face. They're seeing how you react. And a lot of times people mimic your reaction. So that's actually very important. If you smile, they will smile back. If you frown, they will frown back. So there's that. You always want to be able to be in control of that. And so putting forth positive, good-looking face, in a sense, is, gets you there a long way. The second function of facial expressions is that facial changes provide listeners cues to help them interpret. What are you saying? Is this supposed to be a funny thing? Because if you're smiling and laughing, then it's supposed to be something funny. Are you really focused, on your conclusions? Are you really assured, or are you not sure? How confident are you? Your face will tell the story. If you're not confident, people will notice that. And the third thing that the face, when you're presenting does something, is that it basically it establishes a bond between you and your audience. Especially in the West, especially in America, looking at people, looking in their face when speaking to them establishes a certain bond. It establishes a connection. Looking at someone's face, I don't know how to say it, it fosters trust. If people do not look at you in the American culture, that means they have something to hide. So like they won't look you in the eyes because they're trying to be evasive. They're trying to hide something. They're embarrassed about not being honest or something like that. And so mainstream American culture values eye contact, and it's very important to Americans. So in America, speaking to people, avoiding eye contact, automatically people think you got something to hide. Automatically they think you're being deceptive, dishonest, or something like that. Not a good thing. You don't want to be there. So again, in other countries, it's a different story, but that's a different class. So right now we're basically speaking about everything we're talking about here really is applicable to the mainstream American culture. All right, so facial expressions is one thing that we use. The other thing is gestures. I'm hoping that you're familiar with gestures. Gestures are these moments when we move our shoulders or move our arms or our hands or move our body a certain way, but we are basically creating movements that have meaning. Okay, gestures all have meaning. They're purposeful movements. They're not just movements like scratching my head or something like that, or rubbing my hands together or something like that because they're cold. These are purposeful movements. These are movements that communicate meaning. Okay, and so gestures are symbolic. They communicate symbolic meanings. If I make certain gestures, people will interpret my gestures in certain ways. Okay, so what if I go like this? What does that mean? If I go like, what am I saying?
Like you're deaf.
Right, death. Like I'm gonna cut off your head.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy. That is exactly what I'm saying. If I go, you do this, I'm gonna cut your head off. I'm threatening you, right? If I go like this, what am I saying?
That you have a. Oh well, it depends.
Okay, go give me some. Give me options.
It can go, for example, in I don't know how to say, but when you go, for example, against the government.
Okay.
And let's say like
shaking your fist.
Exactly. But it can also be like you have a problem.
Okay. You're showing discontent. You're showing anger. I'm disappointed. I'm angry. I'm shaking fist at you. Why? Because I'm going to hit you with that fist. Fist is not a hand of friendship. If you think about it. This is not how you show your friends you're friendly, with a fist. Fist bump is a different story, but that's a different gesture. But shaking your fist at somebody, almost in every culture, will be construed as an act of aggression, anger, discontent, unhappiness of some sort. Okay, so some gestures are not universal. There are many gestures that are culture bound. In one culture, they mean something. In another culture, they mean something else. So I'm trying to use gestures that are not so culturally construed. But what about this? What if I go like this? Just you looking at me and I go like that. What am I saying?
It's like stop.
Stop. You got it. Exactly. I say stop.
Or like you're doing something wrong. Stop it.
Yeah. Stop. Whatever you're doing. What does that mean?
Enough.
Enough, or cut it out, stop, discontinue, whatever you're doing something wrong. I'm trying to get your attention, so something like that. There are a lot of things that you do. What if I go like this? What does that mean? What does that mean?
Like, I don't know.
I don't know. That's exactly what it means. It means I don't know. Now, this is arbitrary, but why moving my hands like this means I don't know, and why moving my hand like this means I'm going to hit you with my fist, I'm angry. I don't know, but we perceive these particular gestures in certain way. Okay, and these are conventional gestures. These are gestures that we all understand. They mean something. We see it. We know what that means. But there are a lot of gestures that are very culture bound. So the thumbs up gesture, right? In America, what does that mean?
In my case, in my country, is pura vida. Because that's a saying. It's like everything is good.
Everything is good. Everything is all good. Yeah. And in many countries, it's the same way. In America, this means good, right?
Yeah.
And this means bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what if I told you that in some countries, it's an obscene gesture? Okay, it's like giving people the middle finger, basically.
What did you say? Sorry, can you?
In some countries, this is an obscene gesture. It's like what Americans do with the middle finger. This is how they do it.
Yeah. Well,
this is what it means. It's terrible, but in some countries, that's what it means. So you think you're saying, yeah, everything is good, right? But to a person from that country, you're flipping them off. You're being very rude. They don't do it that way. They have a different way of saying everything is good. So not all gestures translate from culture to culture. The same thing with the okay sign, In America, that just means okay. Everything is good, right? But in other cultures, it doesn't.
Yes.
Are you laughing because you know what I'm talking about?
I think so. I'm not 100% sure, but yes, it happens a lot with, for example, when I talk to another Spanish speaking, they usually don't understand some of my words because it's like I am from Costa Rica, but I am from like the more I don't know, not from the city.
Right.
So I have a lot of different words that they're not specifically Spanish. So they're like,
right.
So it's like the same as the signs.
You have your own regional dialect. That's yours.
It's not like a different dialect because I speak Spanish, but I have my own words, some things.
Okay. No, I get it. I understand. So words is one thing, but gestures is yet another thing. So you think you're saying I'm okay or everything is okay, but you're actually could be quite offensive to people anyway. So different class. I teach a class on intercultural communication, and I explain a lot about what different gestures mean in different cultures. It's actually a fun thing to study because they are not universal. But anyway, so there are different types of gestures. There are your conventional gestures. And then there's descriptive gestures where you can show sizes and shapes of things. Like if I say like this, I'm saying just a little, right? Tiny bit. That's what I'm saying. So you can, descriptive gesture is a gesture that describes something. When I say something is round and I go like this with my hands, you're like, oh, he's talking about something round. When I say just a little bit, you offer me, I don't know, second helping of dinner or something like that. Then you say, yeah, you want some of that? And I go, just a little bit. And then you know that what I want is just a tiny bit, not a lot. And then there's indicators, where basically you express your feelings by moving your hands in a certain way, and a lot of times, shrugging your shoulders or throwing your arms in the air, whatever it could be, but you are expressing feelings or emotions of how you feel in a very visual way. So there are different types of gestures out there, but again, you can use all those gestures as you speak. When you're in a room with people and you are using your hands and using your body and using movements, this is a way of you showing meaning, yet in another way. So certain gestures, certain body positions communicate to you that you're relaxed or you're tense. Are you emotional or are you not emotional about something? When you are emotional, you tend to wave your hands a lot and speak loudly and things like that. When you're not emotional about something, you're much more controlled and more reserved and things like this. So, and you can use your gestures to connect with your audience, essentially. And that's, that can be a very powerful way to connect with your audience, as long as they are on the same page with you, what those gestures mean. You can never assume that. But if you are speaking to people who are from your culture and you're pretty sure that this is what it means, then I guess you're safe in using that. Let's see. I'm just trying to get through our chapter here today. I feel like it's not a long chapter, so I feel like I can knock it out in one session without us having to take a break, and maybe we just cut out a little early today. But there's a nice little section here in the textbook, by the way, about virtual online communication. I think it's not bad at all. You guys know something about this because we've been doing it for a while. And so these are all good advice, for people, but people are doing this today, of course, a lot. So that's something that you guys know a lot about. Now, the next section of the chapter talks about adapting your nonverbal behavior to your particular presentation, because we all have our own ways of behaving and gesticulating and doing things. And so adapting your behavior, or basically using your nonverbal behavior in a way to achieve your goals. You have goals when you speak in front of an audience. You don't just speak just to, create a sound. You're doing it to achieve a goal. And so you can use your nonverbal way of speaking to achieve the same goals in the same way that you do with your words. People don't realize, if your words do not match your gestures and your movements and the emotions that you portray in your speech, no matter how good it is not going to work. It really has to work in concert. It has to work together. So number one, the author says, sharing your relationship with your audience through proxemics. How close you are, how far you are. Are you speaking to a large group? Are you speaking to a small group? That makes a big difference. So being close, being far, being able to move a little closer to your audience, even in the middle of your speech, to lean towards them, is to bring them closer. Okay. And that creates a relationship, that creates a connection with your audience that otherwise, you may not have. So speakers moving a little closer, making a step, leaning forward sometimes, especially to the right, which would be your left, is a very clear gesture of closeness and connection. So adapt the physical setting to your communicative needs. There are different, settings that you may speak. with, is it a boardroom? Is it a classroom? And you have to be able to adapt to whatever environment that you're speaking in. So you may move things around, you may stand differently, position yourself differently, and depending on the occasion and the purpose of your speech, obviously. And then adapt your gestures and movements to the size of the audience. Again, depending on where you're speaking, if you're speaking in a small group in the living room, you're free to be very informal and do things. And when you're speaking to a large gathering of people at a much more formal occasion, you may not do that. You can stand in front of a large audience, but it's okay to sit on a couch in front of a bunch of friends. So it's a different story, like whether you have to, behave a certain way. And adapt your gestures. You can wave your arms or not wave your arms, depending on what's happening in the room. Establish eye contact with the audience, looking at specific individuals in the eye. So looking in the eye, again, in the Western culture, is the sign of honesty. It's a sign of a connection. This is how people connect with each other. And this trust is established by looking people directly in the face. Use your body to communicate your feelings. So that's a good advice. If you're angry, shake that fist. That's the idea. You have to show your emotions through your body. If you are really puzzled and unsure, yeah, shrug those shoulders, move them up, emphasize that feeling of I don't know what to do. But that expressing that will put the audience on the same page with you, because they will know exactly what you mean, and then you can explain why you feel the way you feel. Use your full repertoire of gestures. So basically, you have to be ready to gesture, and you have to gesture, let's put it this way, strategically. There are some gestures that you simply want to use because they are strategically convenient to you. And just be ready to do them, be ready to use them, because gestures help you communicate what it is that you're trying to say. So sometimes people feel very stiff, standing still in front of people, not moving much, and that creates, believe it or not, a serious feeling of unease and discomfort on the audience part, because they don't want to be, in this position where a person is uncomfortable, and they are uncomfortable because you're uncomfortable. And so you definitely, want to communicate that idea that you're relaxed and you're comfortable, and there's a connection between you. So these are all good advices for speech delivery. Hopefully, now that we have looked at a whole number of these, it makes sense to you how important not just the message that you prepared, but the way in which you deliver it, and the way in which you move, the way in which you stand, the speed of your speech, the pitch, how high you go, how low you go, you slow down, you speed up, you pause in right places, you give people gestures, that you want to communicate really, something really powerful. You do that. So that's what this speech is, this particular speech chapter is all about. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys, and hopefully the examples that I used, help you out a little bit more. Sometimes the book has really excellent examples. Sometimes I feel like I'm looking for one to help me get the point across. All right. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any ideas? Any feedback?
I don't have questions, but I really agree with what you said about the signs, because sometimes we don't know that for any other. I think that it's mainly for cultures that are not similar. For example, in my case, it happened to me when I talked to another person from, let's say, Morocco or Asia or something like that. But it's a very different culture,
right?
Maybe with Latin people.
Right. The further they are away from you geographically, the more the difference can be, there. So yeah, like And I'll give you an example. So to you, this means stop, right? You just say, okay, stop. You know, you go to Greece, and that's an offensive gesture. It's very rude. It's like hand in the face is very rude.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you really want to insult a person, put the hand out like this in a stop gesture, and they're not going to like it. They're really going to get upset. Because in their culture, that is not a polite gesture. That is a very rude, I'm screaming at you, I'm yelling at you kind of a gesture, you know. And that's just a simple, you know. Or so, for example, let's say you come to the Middle East and you're driving the car and you see a guy who's blocking your road, right? And you want to get by, and he stands and he goes like this, you know, like this. He folds his fingers into almost like a flower petal, and he goes like that. What do you think he means?
In the middle of the street.
Yeah, he's blocking the street. You're driving, you want to get through. You roll down your window, and he goes like this, folds his fingers like a tulip, and shakes it at you multiple times like that. What do you think he means? He's not saying anything. He's just gesturing. What does it mean to you? How would you interpret it?
For example, I know that, for example, that gesture on Mexico, on like most of the Latin culture, it means like I am hungry.
Right, I'm hungry.
But
Okay.
for example, on Argentina, that gesture means that it's like an insult.
Right. So when you go like this, right?
Yeah.
Like, and Italians would say when something is tasty, the Italians would go mwah, like this, mwah. You know,
Yeah,
something is
yeah.
tasty or good or something like that. So that they would do that. But this gesture is a little bit different. So in the Middle East, it means wait. It means wait a minute. It means
Whoa.
I heard you. I'm not ignoring you, but I need a moment. I am not ready to move. Like, give me a moment, you know, wait a minute kind of thing. And that's what the gesture is. It's a gesture that communicates urgency, and it's not rude and it's not mean, but it's just saying, wait a moment. That's all it is. And again, you could see how, you know, you get these gestures and you're like, well, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. I'm not familiar with that gesture because it's not, you know, in my culture, we don't do that, you know, essentially. And so the further you are away from home, as Nancy said, the more weird the gestures can get. And sometimes the gestures that you think you know what they mean, they actually mean something else. And that's something you have to keep in mind. So, you know, I used to take groups all the time to the Middle East with me. And, you know, taking tourists to the Middle East, I have to give them a lot of training and explain what to do, what not to do, some of the cultural ways of what's acceptable, what's unacceptable. And one of the hardest things I had with Americans in the Middle East and in Asia, you know, especially too, is showing the bottom of your feet. In Middle Eastern cultures and Near Eastern and Far Eastern cultures, showing the bottom of your feet is highly disrespectful. Americans would sit down and they put their feet on a table. In those cultures, that's like, you know, you might as well have just taken off your pants and gone to the bathroom in front of me. That's how rude it is. It's just so bad. Showing somebody the bottom of your feet is considered very disrespectful. So there's just funny things that exist from culture to culture of what things mean to people. Something seemingly unimportant to one person actually means something completely different to another. So we got to be mindful of that. But these gestures are not universal. So focus on the universal things. But here's where you luck out. As a speaker, you have a chance to gesture, and not just gesture, but also say what you mean. And so people can interpret your gestures, even if they don't know exactly 100% what they mean. They can interpret them because the words that go along with that gesture are actually expressing what it is that you want them to hear. And that's the difference. So being a speaker is more, you know, dynamic in a sense, because you get to communicate the same message in two different ways. with words and without words. And in that sense, you're a little bit safer, because if somebody misunderstood your gesture, at least they understood your words. And they realize that that is not how you meant it, or it's not what you meant by it, is what they know. And so essentially you are redefining the meaning for them by speaking. Okay. All right. Cool. So I'm just hoping that this chapter is helpful to you. There's a lot of aspects in communication. There's a lot of aspects in speaking publicly, and this is one of them, as far as how you use your body and how you use your voice, going up, going down. I mean, I don't know if you had a chance to practice that, but when you speak really loud, people tend to listen a lot more. They pay attention. When you speak really quiet, they tune you out. And so it just depends. In some environments, it's the opposite, you know, and some of that is cultural as well. But most of the textbook, you know, material here is oriented towards Western culture, American culture in particular. All right. Good. So that's pretty much all I have for you, ladies and gentlemen. This is it. So I will see you in class next week. If you have any questions, you know, let me know. You please look at your syllabus. You got your assignments in there. Track with me next week, quiz, and then week after that, prepare your speeches, get your PowerPoints ready. Maybe we'll practice next week again with presenting. Hopefully, you know, will work. So if you can have, you know, we just need to make sure that everything is working, basically. I don't want to do what I did by running my presentation and you guys not being able to see it. Okay, I want to be able to see your presentations. All right, so I'll see you next week. All right.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, be well. Take care. Bye.